Tonight, we're going to spend the next few hours living the quiet, ordinary life of someone history rarely remembers. There are no kings, no famous battles, no great discoveries, just another day in the Middle Ages. Tonight, you walk through a quiet day with the king's gardener, not the grand version, the real one, the damp one, the earth-stained one, the one made of cold fingers, clipped herbs, and the soft drag of a rake over packed soil. If quiet nights like this help you rest, you are welcome to stay with the channel. Now, let the room grow a little softer, let your breathing slow, and settle in beside a walled garden just before dawn, where the air smells faintly of wet leaves, old straw, and yesterday's rain. You wake before the sky has made up its mind. The light is still thin, more grey than blue, the kind of light that shows shape before colour. Your blanket is cool, the floor is cooler. Somewhere beyond the small room, a hinge gives a tired little groan. A cartwheel shifts in the yard. A cock crows as if he alone has arranged the morning. You dress by habit, wool first. Then the rougher outer layer that already carries yesterday's smell of damp soil and green things, bruised between the fingers. Nothing about this feels royal. That is one of the quieter truths of the work. The king may own the garden. The garden still answers to weather, rot, birds, slugs, crows, frost, and neglect. It answers to hands as well. Mostly to hands. Before food, before warmth, before any easy pace, you step out into the air. The ground gives slightly under your shoes. Dew has settled on the grass beyond the path, and each blade holds its own pale bead of water. The walls around the garden keep out wandering animals and idle feet. They also keep in a kind of order. Within them, leeks stand where leeks should stand. Parsley stays in its bed. Beans climb where they are meant to climb. In a great household, that neatness is part of the service. Food, medicine, scent, and show all grow inside the same enclosure. A king's garden in late medieval England is not one thing. It may include herb beds, kitchen plots, fruit trees, perhaps a little arbour, a turf seat, a walk for gentle legs, even fish ponds or nearby orchard ground depending on the residence. Modern historians have to piece much of this together from account rolls, archaeology, manuscript pictures, and the remains of places altered many times. No gardener has left you a tidy little diary saying, "I rose at this hour and trimmed this branch and cursed that goose." So the day comes back slowly, through tools, payments, plant remains, and images of bent backs doing work that needed doing. You begin with the gate and the latch. Then your eyes do what trained eyes always do. They travel, along the fence line, over the damp beds, across the young greens, toward the herbery, toward the fruit trees, toward the patch where the soil looked too heavy yesterday. You are not searching for drama, only for small offences, a loosened hurdle, a rabbit's nibble, a snapped tie on a trained branch. Water standing where water should have drained away in the night. This is how much of your skill works. Not in grandeur, in noticing. Your tools are simple enough to look almost disappointing. Spade, hoe, rake, knife, pruning hook, basket. Perhaps a watering vessel hauled from a well or cistern. A cart when heavier things must move. Nothing here gleams like armor. Nothing here would impress a minstrel. Yet every one of these plain tools asks for the same thing from you. Time, repetition, a back willing to bend, hands willing to harden. Near the orchard edge, you pause by a fruit tree trained carefully within the bounds allowed to it. The branches are still. The bark is dark with moisture. If this were spring, you would be thinking of grafts and fresh growth. If summer, of watering and tying and watching fruit swell or fail. If autumn, of gathering and sorting. If winter, of dung, digging, pruning and repair. The year changes the labor does not disappear. A bell begins somewhere beyond the garden wall, distant, hollow, familiar. It does not command the plants, it does command the day. In medieval England, bells help divide hours that few people count with numbers. Prayer, meal, work, closure. Even outdoors under cloud and bird call, your time belongs partly to that shared ringing world. So before the household stirs fully, and before any basket goes inward toward the kitchen, you take your first slow walk between the beds and begin the morning's quiet inventory. The first work is the sort that rarely gets remembered because it leaves so little to boast about. You check the beds. You press a little soil between finger and thumb. You look for the places where yesterday's rain helped and the places where it merely settled and sulked. A good garden does not come from planting alone. It comes from correction. Small correction, over and over, until a space meant for food and herbs and pleasant walking does not slide back into mud and appetite. In one patch, the earth has crusted slightly on top. Not badly, just enough to need loosening. You take up the hoe and work the surface with short, patient strokes. The sound is dry and soft. A light chuff, a scrape, a pause, then again. It is not deep digging. Not yet. More like persuading the ground to breathe a little where it has packed itself down. Nearby, onion greens hold steady. A row of cabbages sits with the serious look cabbages always seem to have, as if they mistrust joy. The herb beds ask for gentler hands. Sage, parsley, rue, perhaps hyssop or fennel, depending on the season and place. A royal household wants such things for cooking, for scent, for simple remedies, and for the general expectation that an ordered residence should produce them. Elite medieval gardens are useful and decorative at once. That sounds lofty until you are bent over before breakfast, pinching away decay from a damp cluster of leaves. Most splendor begins in rather petty labor. You carry a basket on one arm and move slowly down the bed, taking what is ready and leaving what is not. This rhythm matters. To cut too much is waste. To cut too little sends someone inward grumbling that the kitchen has asked and the garden has failed to answer. A great house runs on these narrow agreements between places. The steward counts. The cook expects. The clerk may note supplies and purchases. The gardener, if he is lucky, is rarely noticed at all. In service work, invisibility often means the day is going properly. From surviving records, historians can see that royal residences used paid specialists, labourers, carters, and all the other useful people required to keep enclosed grounds alive. Gardens, orchards, vines, fish ponds, and pleasure spaces did not simply happen because a noble person admired flowers. They consumed labour in the same calm, relentless way a fire consumes wood. Sometimes the records show materials, stakes, plants, repairs, deliveries. Sometimes they show wages. Often they do not show the worker's thoughts, which may have been mostly about the weather and whether his boots would ever dry. At the edge of the plot, a woven hurdle has shifted just enough to matter. You stop and set it right. This is another ordinary part of the day. Boundaries need help. Medieval gardens are often enclosed by wall, hedge, fence, or trellis, not only because enclosed places are handsome, but because tender plants are vulnerable and vegetables have enemies with feathers, teeth, and idle hands. A gap in a boundary is an invitation, so you push the stake firmer into the ground and test it twice. The orchard wants a look next. Not a long one, just enough to see whether any branch tie has slipped and whether wind has worried the younger wood. A pruning hook rides at your side. Small curved blade, plain handle. It is a modest tool for a royal setting, though perhaps that is fitting. A jeweled cup can sit all day and still be precious. A pruning hook proves its worth only by being used until the edge wears smooth in places where green wood has met iron 1,000 times. You trim one stray shoot, then another. Nothing dramatic, a careful cut close to the growth that should stay. In a world without engines and hoses and packets of modern certainty, much depends on these repeated choices. Too early, too late, too much water, too little. Let the branch run wild and the shape is lost. Cut badly and next year's fruit may suffer for this morning's impatience. By now the air has changed. Not warmer exactly, just less night-bound. A servant crosses a far yard with a pail. Somewhere a door opens and closes hard enough to carry. Smoke begins to rise from another quarter of the household. The great machinery of other people's comfort is slowly waking. You kneel beside a damp bed and pull the smallest weeds while the soil still yields them easily. One root, then the next, then the next. Your fingers grow dark. Your knees complain in their plain, steady way. There is no glory in this. There is also no avoiding it. If the king's table is to have herbs, if the household is to have onions, leeks, peas, beans, fruit, or simple green freshness in season, if a lady wishes to walk beside ordered borders rather than patches of neglect, if the enclosed place is to smell of growth rather than stagnation, then someone must be here early, with cold hands, doing this. And so the morning settles fully around you, and the first baskets begin to fill. The first baskets are not heavy yet. That is part of their value. Tender things bruise easily, and a royal kitchen likes neatness almost as much as freshness. So you choose with care. A handful of parsley, young leeks, a few onions that have reached a good size, sage with dry leaves, not torn ones, mint that still smells sharp when your thumb passes over it. The garden is quiet, but the household is no longer asleep. Somewhere beyond the wall, a door opens. A pail knocks against stone. A dog gives one bored bark and stops. You keep working at the pace the plants allow. Pull, shake off the clinging soil, trim the root end. Lay each piece into the basket, not dropped, only placed. This is one of the plain truths of a king's garden. It is not only a pretty enclosure for walking, it is also supply. Medieval elite gardens often mix pleasure with use. Beds of herbs and vegetables sit near paths made for strolling. Fruit trees can shade a bench and also feed a table. A walled space can smell sweet and still answer to the kitchen. You do not need a grand theory to know this. You can feel it in the basket growing full against your forearm. The king may never see the patch where these leeks stood. Still, someone at the royal residence expects food, flavor, and order. Those expectations travel outward through steward, cook, clerk, and servant until they reach your sore hands in the damp morning. By now, the dew is lifting from the edges of the beds. The light has turned from grey to a pale colour that makes the leaves look thinner than they did before sunrise. You move on to the herbery, where the scents wake more quickly than people do. Rue carries its bitter green smell. Thyme stays low and steady. Fennel lifts a faint sweetness into the air when brushed. Some plants are cut for cooking. Some are kept for physic, for scent, or for the household's small remedies. Medieval records and manuals do not always give us a full list for one exact royal garden on one exact day. So part of this scene is careful reconstruction. But herbs, alliums, legumes, fruit, and useful green things belonged in such spaces, and someone had to know which patch was ready and which patch should be left alone for another week. That knowledge is not dramatic. It sits in the body. It is the memory of what bolted too fast in a hot spell. The memory of where slugs gathered after rain. The memory of which corner keeps moisture longest. A garden like this rewards attention more than force. The tools are simple: a knife, a basket, your fingers. Skill lies in timing. When one basket is full, you straighten slowly, because standing is its own small labor after kneeling. Your back gives its opinion. Your knees give theirs. Neither is surprised. Then the path carries you toward the service side of the residence, where gardens become household goods the moment they pass through a door. The kitchen yard has its own weather. Warmer, noisier, a little greasy in the air. A servant glances into the basket and sees not beauty, but the shape of the noon meal beginning. That is fair enough. Produce in a royal household is rarely just picked and forgotten. Things are counted, received, sorted, perhaps noted by someone whose work is cleaner than yours. We should be cautious here because surviving records are uneven, and they preserve systems better than moments. Still, royal service runs on account as much as effort. What leaves the garden often enters a chain of handling. Quiet labor becomes inventory. You do not linger long at the door. Gardens dislike absence. Once the basket is off your arm feels oddly light. Then the next empty basket is pressed into it, and the balance returns. Behind you, the morning meal for others has moved one step closer. Ahead of you, the beds still wait in rows, patient and damp, asking only the next small necessary thing. With the first picking delivered, the garden grows ordinary again. This is often how useful work feels. For a brief moment it becomes visible to other people, and then it settles back into repetition. You return to the beds with an empty basket, a hoe, and a different kind of patience. The sun is higher now, though not yet hot. Morning in a walled garden changes by degrees. Damp earth begins to crust at the top. Shadows shorten along the path edges. Bees become busy enough to hear. If there has been little rain, you think about water almost before you think about weeds. Watering by hand is slow. There is no hidden convenience waiting to save your shoulders. A well, a cistern, or nearby stored water may serve the garden, depending on the place. Buckets must be lowered, lifted, carried, poured. Vessels fill and empty with no pity for the person carrying them. Experimental reconstructions and common sense agree on this much. Hand watering a substantial enclosed garden takes time, so you begin where thirst matters most. The youngest beds first. Newly set plants, herbs with shallow hold, tender greens that cannot argue with a dry morning. You tip water carefully at the roots rather than splashing it everywhere. Mud freckles your shins. The handles bite into your palms. By the fourth or fifth trip, the body stops complaining in words and settles into a dull agreement. This is where a king's gardener looks least like a servant of grandeur. You are not arranging roses for a poem. You are carrying water. The work can be almost comic in its plainness. Behind fortified walls and under the protection of great names, someone still has to slosh buckets from one place to another so that a row of onions does not fail. And yet royal gardens are controlled spaces for a reason. Walls and woven barriers keep out wandering animals, stray feet and casual theft. They also mark a boundary. Inside, growth is watched. Beds are ordered. Fruit is trained. Paths are kept passable for those who come here to walk, pray, talk privately, or simply breathe air that smells better than a stable yard. That means your next task is not always for the plants themselves. Sometimes it is for the shape of the place. You take up a rake and draw gravel or beaten earth back into line where traffic has chewed at the path. You nudge aside dead leaves. You right a border stake that has leaned. You tuck in the fraying edge of a wattled support. None of it is grand. All of it matters if the space is to look governed rather than neglected. This mixture of use and display is one of the most familiar features of medieval elite gardens. A place can grow cabbages and still present order. It can feed the household and flatter the eye. The same enclosure may hold medicinal herbs, kitchen produce, fruit trees, and pleasant corners for sitting. Historians know this from a patchwork of sources rather than one perfect plan. Archaeology, manuscript images, account records, and later remains all help, each one incomplete in its own way. You do not think in those terms, of course. You think in surfaces and signs. A leaf gone pale. A bed gone weedy at the edge. A path too soft underfoot after rain. A branch rubbing where it should not. Knowledge comes to you as a list of irritations before it ever becomes a tidy explanation. Near the orchard side, you pause under a fruit tree and look upward through leaves that are still thin enough to let broken light through. If this were another season, the work would shift. Winter would ask for digging and dung, spring for sowing and grafting, autumn for fruit gathering and storage. But this morning belongs to summer maintenance, which means care repeated so often it almost stops feeling like separate acts. You cut away a small, unwanted shoot with a pruning knife. You tie another stem where it will grow more usefully. You check for damage near the bark. A curved iron hook, the sort archaeologists sometimes recover from late medieval garden contexts, would be a modest thing in the hand. No jewel, no inscription, just a tool shaped by repeated use on green wood. The kingdom leaves brighter objects behind, but this kind of blade may have served the daily order of the place more faithfully than silver ever did. By late morning, the air has warmed enough that the scent of bruised herbs hangs close to the wall. Your tunic clings a little at the back. Dust gathers over the damp marks on your shoes. Nothing dramatic has happened. That is the point. The garden asks for constancy. One bed, then the next. One bucket, then the next. One careful cut, then another. And as the bells move the day onward, the work narrows gently toward the hour when even a royal gardener must think about a simple meal and a short rest. By the time the sun stands high enough to bleach the top of the wall, the morning's sharper labor begins to loosen its grip. You feel it first in your shoulders, then in your palms, then in the slow way you lower a basket instead of simply setting it down. Noon in a royal garden is not grand. It is a pause taken close to the work, with dirt still at the hem and herb scent still on the fingers. You do not go far. At a great household, distance belongs to people with cleaner duties. A gardener usually eats where service people eat, somewhere practical, somewhere half between the world of ordered beds and the world of kitchen steam. Perhaps a bench by a wall, perhaps a patch of shade near the yard, perhaps only the lip of an upturned cart if no one else has claimed it. The important thing is not comfort, it is stillness. Your meal is plain enough to seem almost invisible. Bread, a little cheese if there is cheese, pottage if the kitchen has sent some out, and ale that is weak enough to drink through labor without making the day tilt. Onions, leeks, peas, and beans fill many medieval bowls, and there is a quiet comedy in that. The man who grows them may eat much the same things he carries inward for other people, only in humbler form, with less butter, less white bread, and no ceremony at all. You chew slowly because your body insists on it. Once you stop moving, you notice where the morning has settled into you. The back of the neck feels warm. The knees feel full of grit. One thumb has a tender place from the knife handle. Your shoes, damp at dawn, are now drying stiff. Nothing here would make a chronicler reach for ink. Yet this is the real middle of the day. Not a trumpet, not a command, just a servant eating while flies move lazily in the heat. Around you, other tasks of the household continue in their own tones. Somewhere nearby, a pot lid knocks. A carter curses softly at a wheel. A dog noses under a bench in hope rather than optimism. A clerk may be counting something in a chamber you never enter, turning bushels and payments into lines on parchment. Royal life rests on these small separations. Someone counts, someone carries, someone scrubs. You sit for a little while between the carrying and the returning. The garden is not absent even when you are away from it. It follows you in marks. There is dark soil under the nail. A crushed thread of parsley clings to your sleeve. One cuff smells faintly of mint because you brushed a bed too closely an hour ago. This is one of the stranger truths of such work. The place enters your body by degrees. Smoke enters a smith. Flour enters a baker. Damp earth enters you. If the season is summer, the meal may be brief because heat does not excuse neglect. Hand watering, tying, cutting, and watching all continue while the light is good. If the year leans toward autumn, there may be more sorting to do, more gathering, more concern for bruised fruit and storage. If spring is still young, every hour has a different tenderness, and a meal feels less like rest than like a short agreement with your own muscles. Medieval garden labor is seasonal before it is personal. The body learns the calendar because it has no choice. We should be a little careful here. No surviving diary gives us your exact noon meal at a king's residence on a single date. What historians have instead are household patterns, records of provisions, garden accounts, manuals used cautiously, and the stubborn logic of work. Servants ate simple food. Outdoor laborers paused when they could. The meal belongs to reconstruction, but it is a modest one built from ordinary practice rather than romance. The bell sounds again at some point, or perhaps it is only the kitchen's renewed noise that reminds you the pause is thinning. You finish what can be finished. Crumbs are brushed from the palm. The cup is lowered. For a moment longer, you sit in the shade and do nothing at all, which is one of the finest luxuries available to a working body. Then you stand, slowly at first, and the afternoon returns in the old, familiar shape. Paths to check, ties to tighten, and living things that have been quietly growing while you eat. After the meal, the day becomes less heroic than people imagine, and more true. The heavy lifting of morning has passed. Now comes the patient work that keeps a garden from quietly slipping backward. You return through the gate and notice at once what noon light reveals more clearly than dawn did. A tie has loosened on a young stem. A path edge has crumbled where feet cut the corner. A bed that looked neat at sunrise now shows a fine green haze of weeds, no bigger than fingernails. This is the hour for small corrections. You kneel, you pinch out what should not be there. You press earth back around what should. The labor is not dramatic, it is intimate. A garden of this kind is made less by grand planting than by repeated refusal to let disorder settle in. Medieval tools are simple. Hands do much of the finishing. A hoe can stir a surface. A rake can smooth it. A knife can cut. Yet none of them can decide where your attention ought to fall. That part is yours. If there are fruit trees under your care, the orchard asks for a different pace. There may be shoots to trim, withies to cut, branches to guide, or damaged growth to remove with a light curved hook. Not hard chopping, careful cutting. The kind that asks the wrist to judge as much as the arm. A royal garden may include apples, pears, perhaps vines in some places, certainly herbs and useful plants mixed with more pleasing arrangements. Utility and display live very close together here. The same enclosure that feeds a household can also offer shade, scent, order, and a place for noble feet to walk without mud. You notice signs of intrusion too, not battle. Nothing so important. A rabbit has worried at something near a boundary. A bird has taken what it can. A dog, if one was careless, may have crossed where it should not. This is why walls, hedges, wattled borders, and fences matter so much in medieval gardens. They keep out hunger, hooves, idle wandering, and theft in small portions. The wall is not only a border, it is a promise that what grows inside has been claimed, protected, and arranged. There may be others working near you, though not always side by side. A hired labourer moves a cart of dung toward a corner where future fertility waits in an unpleasant heap. Someone helps clear a ditch so rainwater does not stand too long near roots. At some residences, especially after the Great Plague years changed the value of labour, every additional pair of hands matters. Skilled care cannot be everywhere at once. So your afternoon may include not only doing, but noticing who has done badly, who has forgotten a gate latch, who has cut too close, who has left a basket where the handle warps in the sun. This too is part of royal service. Quiet authority in a dirty place. Not lordship, nothing so grand. Just responsibility narrow enough to be missed by history and wide enough to fill a whole day. Produce does not leap from bed to board on its own. Paths do not hold their edges by prayer. The enclosed calm admired by gentle visitors depends on someone seeing the untidy thing early before it becomes a larger untidy thing. In manuscript images, gardeners often look neat, almost decorous, even while digging or gathering. Real work is less composed. Your lower back reminds you of that. The knees stiffen when you stand. The fingers keep the shape of tool handles for a while after the tools are set down. We use those images carefully, then check them against surviving tools, account rolls, and what practical gardening still teaches. The result is not certainty in every detail. It is something quieter, a probable rhythm, a believable tiredness. The afternoon light changes almost without asking permission. Shadows from the wall lengthen across the path in bars. Mint gives off more scent where the sun struck it hardest. Bees move lazily around late flowers, busy in a way that feels calmer than your own. You carry another basket, though not as full as those of the morning. You sort a few cuttings. You set aside what can go inward and what must stay out. At a palace or castle, even these small motions belong to a larger machine of storage, cooking, record, and use, though you meet that machine mostly at its edges. Soon enough, the work thins toward evening tasks. Gates will need checking. Tools will need gathering. Water may need one last look before night cools the soil. For now, though, the day is still held in the long middle stretch, when the sun is gentler, the body is slower, and the garden asks not for speed, but for attention. One loosened tie, one crumbling edge, one quiet necessary correction after another. The sun has begun to lower, though not yet enough to cool the stones. The garden changes its mood at this hour. The bright labour of noon gives way to counting, carrying and looking twice at things that looked simple earlier. You lift a basket that is not very heavy at first. Then the handle presses into your palm, and by the end of the path it feels heavier than it did beside the bed where it was filled. This is one of the quieter truths of garden work. Much of it is not planting. Much of it is carrying what has already grown. A handful of parsley, a bunch of leeks, some onions pulled small because the kitchen wants them now, not later. Perhaps a few heads of lettuce if the season is kind. Perhaps herbs for pottage, or for sauces, or for the chamber where scent matters almost as much as food. Elite gardens in late medieval England are mixed places. They feed, they please the eye. They also supply the little refinements that make a household feel ordered. You walk these things inward by service paths. The grander spaces are not for you unless work takes you there. Your road is the practical one. Packed earth. A gatepost rubbed smooth by many hands. A yard where carts have left old ruts. Somewhere nearby, a cook wants greens before the light fails too much. Somewhere else, a clerk or servant may want to know what has come in, especially in a large household where stores, kitchens, and gardens are part of one slow machine. We should be careful here. No single surviving diary tells us, hour by hour, how one king's gardener carried supper inward. Much of this has to be rebuilt from household accounts, garden records, plant evidence, and images in manuscripts. Still, the broad shape is firm enough. Royal gardens were not idle ornaments left to decorate themselves. They needed labor. Things were cut, gathered, moved, and used. A garden behind walls was tied to rooms within walls. You set the basket down at last and feel the hand lighten. That small relief is one of the best moments in any working day. A few words are exchanged, not many. Service work often runs on brief speech. Enough to say what has come, enough to say what is needed tomorrow if anyone knows. Sometimes no one knows. The household can change its appetite faster than a bed of cabbages can change its pace. Then there may be another trip. There is often another trip. One basket alone rarely finishes anything. Cuttings to be sorted, herbs to be hung or spread, wind-fallen fruit to be kept apart from sound fruit. What bruises soon must be eaten soon. What keeps better may go farther into storage. At a royal residence, even humble produce enters a world of rank. The finest table does not eat everything. The wider household consumes a great deal, and the gardener's labor slides quietly between these levels. As you cross back into the garden, the light has softened into a pale gold that flatters almost everything. Leaves look less ragged now. Dust looks gentler. Even the weeds seem less impertinent than they did in the full glare of afternoon. You notice, because noticing is the trade more than strength alone. A bed that needs one more watering, a strip of soil broken by a scratching bird, a stake leaning enough to matter by morning. So you do not stop at carrying. You bend again. You press soil back into place with the side of your shoe. You straighten the stake. You gather a few herb stems that were missed before. Little afterthoughts fill the edge of the day. They are not truly afterthoughts, of course. They are the work as it really is. Not one grand task completed cleanly, but many small corrections stitched together until the evening bell. And through all of it, the garden remains both near and separate from royal life. A king may walk here. A noble guest may admire the enclosed green, the ordered paths, the scent of herbs, the fruit trained neatly where it should be. Yet the work that keeps it so belongs to hands like yours, moving in and out by sideways, carrying supper in wicker and weariness in the shoulders, while the light thins softly over the beds. By this hour, the day has begun to fold itself inward. The loudest work is over. What remains is slower and in its way more soothing. You do not hurry now unless something has plainly gone wrong. Evening asks for closure, not the grand kind, just the ordinary sort. Gates checked, tools gathered, water judged one last time. You start with what was left out. A hoe leaning against a low wall. A rake with a few teeth still holding crumbs of soil. A basket turned upside down to shake loose dust and leaf bits. A knife or pruning hook wrapped away carefully, because iron is useful and costly enough not to abandon to damp if it can be helped. Medieval garden work depends on simple tools more than clever devices. Spades, hoes, hooks, knives, carts, and baskets do most of it. So the day ends very often with putting plain things back where plain things belong. Your hands know where each tool sits even when the light is weaker. That too is part of skill. Not only cutting and tying and sewing, but arranging tomorrow so that tomorrow begins without confusion. A tool misplaced at dusk becomes needless annoyance at dawn. Sleep will come easier if the order is right. The body likes that, the mind does too, though people in your station may not spend much time naming the feeling. Then, you walk the boundary. Many medieval gardens are enclosed by wall, fence, hedge, hurdle, or trellis. The enclosure keeps more than one thing out. Stray animals, certainly. Hungry geese, dogs with no respect for beds, sometimes thieves, or at least casual pilferers who think a handful of herbs does not count as theft if no one sees. The barrier also marks the space as governed. This patch of earth is not open field. It is a managed place. Someone answers for it. So you look at latches. You study woven sections where the willow has loosened. You notice where damp has softened a post near the ground. These are not elegant tasks, but they matter. A royal garden can lose dignity quickly through a hole the size of a rabbit run. It can lose supper the same way. A gardener spends part of his life preserving boundaries against the small, persistent appetites of the world. There may still be watering to do, though less than in the heat of midday. This depends on season, weather, and what the soil already holds. We are reconstructing, not quoting a perfect record, when we imagine you lifting a vessel for one final round. Yet seasonal logic supports it. In summer, hand watering can stretch across the day, and evening water has a plain mercy in it. Less glare, less waste to immediate sun, more chance for the moisture to settle where roots can use it. You pour slowly. The sound is mild, a hollow vessel tipping. Water striking dry earth first with a sharper note, then sinking into a darker patch that goes quiet. It is one of the day's most satisfying changes. Dust becomes soil again. A drooping leaf seems less tired. Not revived in any magical sense, just given what it needs in time. From somewhere beyond the wall comes the wider household settling into its own evening order. Footsteps in a passage. A doorbar set into place. A distant bell, perhaps from chapel, perhaps from a nearby church if the air carries it. Medieval labour often moves by bells more than by numbers on a dial. You have felt the day in light and ache and routine. The bell only confirms what the body already knows. There may be a little sorting still to do before full dimness. Seeds set aside. Twine coiled. A cracked handle noticed and remembered for repair. If there are labourers under you on some days, this is when brief instructions might be given. If not, you keep the list in your head. Tomorrow, tie the peas again. Tomorrow, clear that patch near the onions. Tomorrow, ask whether more dung can be had for the farther bed. Royal service may sound lofty from a distance. Up close, it often feels like remembering 3 practical things while your back gently complains. At last, the path home, or at least the path away from the beds, begins to feel allowable. You take one more look because nearly everyone who tends living things takes one more look. The rows are not perfect, they never are, but they are steadier than they were at dawn. The gate is fastened. The tools are in. The soil holds a little coolness now. Evening settles over the enclosed ground with no fanfare at all, only the quiet comfort of work that has been ordinary, necessary, and, for one more day, enough. From the garden gate, your evening does not leap into rest. It thins into smaller duties. You carry what still needs carrying. A last bundle of herbs, a basket with a few onions perhaps, or a handful of beans missed earlier, or sprigs cut because the kitchen asked before the light failed. Royal households run on grand words from a distance, but up close they often run on somebody remembering to bring in the parsley before it wilts. You walk inward by the service way, where the fine parts of the residence are sensed more than seen. Stone holds the day's warmth in some places. In others, it has already gone cool. Near the kitchen side, the air changes. Smoke from cooking fires sits low and familiar. You smell pottage, wet wood, ale. Bread if you are fortunate, oats if the day is plain, and most days are plain. The people here know you by work more than by name. A cook's helper glances into the basket. A clerk, if this is a house that keeps careful tally, may care less about the dirt on the leeks than about whether the number matches expectation. We should be gentle here because records survive in uneven ways. Not every late medieval palace leaves us a neat little note saying exactly what one gardener handed over at dusk. Still, large households counted food, counted labour, counted supplies. Quiet things entered parchment all the time. So some part of your evening may belong to that soft machinery of account. Not a speech, not a ceremony, just a brief standing still while produce is looked at, weighed by eye or entered in memory to be written later. The garden is enclosed, but it is not separate. It feeds into kitchens, infirmary stores, chambers, and status. A bunch of sage can be supper, physic, or scent depending on whose room it reaches. Once the carrying is done, the body begins to sag in a more honest way. This is the hour when tiredness no longer needs pretending to be strength. Your hands keep the shape of tools even after the tools are gone. The palm still remembers wood handles. The fingers still hold a slight curl, as if they mean to close around one more length of twine. Dirt stays under the nails. No amount of rinsing in a basin truly wins that argument. Then comes food of your own, or something near enough to food that the body agrees to continue. For a servant or working hand in medieval England, supper is usually modest. Bread, ale weak enough to drink daily, pottage thick with peas or beans if the pot has been generous, onion, leek, maybe cheese. On some days, fish, especially where custom or the church calendar bends the meal away from meat. It is one of the quiet little truths of the day that you may have spent hours tending pleasant things for elite tables while eating much the same plain fare as other labouring people nearby. The king's household stands above you. Hunger does not. You sit if there is room to sit. The relief is immediate and unimpressive. Bench, stool, step. Your back loosens by small degrees, suspicious at first, then grateful. Talk around you may be sparse. End-of-day speech is often practical. Who needs a cart in the morning? Which hinge stuck? Whether the weather smells fair or damp? Whether the lower bed wants turning soon? Medieval life contains less constant eloquence than manuscripts might suggest. Much of it is people chewing in peace. If this is summer, there is still a little light outside, stretched thin and pale now. If it is another season, darkness gathers sooner and with more authority. In either case, the garden has passed out of your hands for the night. That is never entirely comfortable. A late frost, a wandering animal, a careless boy, too much wet at the roots, too little cover on a tender thing. All of that can happen while you are trying to rest. Enclosure helps, walls help, gates help. They do not make living things obedient. And yet, there is a kind of peace in no longer being able to improve anything before morning. The beds will do what beds do in darkness. Moisture will settle, leaves will cool. Snails, no doubt, will begin their own quiet feast with the confidence of creatures that pay no wages and keep no accounts. You have done the share that belonged to your hands, so the evening narrows. The basket is empty now. The tools are away. The clerk, if there was one, has his numbers or will invent a line for them later. The kitchen has taken in what it wanted. Your meal sits warm in the belly for a little while, and the long day that began in chill and dimness finally starts to fold itself toward shelter, with only the slow business of prayer, family, or sleep still left to meet. The day has narrowed as far as it can narrow without ending. What remains is modest. You step out of the service yard and into the slower rhythm that belongs to evening people, not working people, though, of course, the same bodies must do both. The air feels cooler now against the face. Smoke from other hearths sits low and faint in the lane. Somewhere nearby, a bell has already said what it needs to say about the hour. If you are lodged within the wider household, your supper may have been plain and quick, taken among other servants whose days also smell of their trades. If you sleep outside the main residence, in a village house or rented room, then the path home is a little darker and a little more private. In either case, there is no grand separation between royal work and ordinary life. A king may dine behind walls with candles, sauces, and ceremony. You carry dirt in the cuffs and perhaps a heel rubbed sore by damp shoes, and you still must think about warmth, about a stool, about whether there is enough ale left in the jug to soften the throat before sleep. Evening devotion may come in a chapel if your place and duty keep you near one, or in a quieter form where you stand, sit, or kneel as habit allows. Medieval life is tied to prayer by bells, by custom, by expectation, and by the shape of the year itself. Yet for a working gardener at the end of a long day, prayer may be less like lofty thought and more like a small clearing in the mind. The beds are shut, the tools are housed, the kitchen has what it was given. The orchard, if there is one, must stand in darkness without you. That too is a kind of release. Your hands begin to notice themselves once the tasks have stopped. This is one of the quiet tricks of labor. While you are carrying, tying, digging, cutting, and lifting, the body keeps its own stern counsel. Once you sit still, every finger has an opinion. There may be soil dried into the lines of the palm. There may be a nick from a thorn, or a frayed withy. The shoulders hold a warm heaviness. The lower back gives its familiar complaint. None of this is exceptional. It is only the body's record of usefulness, written without ink. If there is family near, the talk is likely small and practical. Someone asks what came in from the beds. Someone mentions the weather expected tomorrow, though medieval weather is mostly guessed by cloud, wind, and memory, and guessed with confidence anyway. A child may drift towards sleep before the fire has burned low. A woman mending linen, a man easing boots from tired feet, an older parent speaking about a patch of coughing or the price of grain somewhere farther off. The king's garden does not follow you here as splendor. It follows you home in more ordinary forms. A smell of crushed parsley in the sleeve, damp at the hem, perhaps a bit of onion skin caught in a fold of cloth. And there is often some little thing left to do, because most days in the Middle Ages do not end cleanly. A belt needs hanging. A knife needs wiping. Shoes should be set where they may dry a little by morning, but not harden too near the heat. If you have brought home scraps, a bruised leek perhaps, or the memory of kitchen waste that may later become useful dung, these too belong to the economy of a labouring household. Nothing is abstract for long. Nearly everything becomes food, fuel, muck, patch, string, or need. This is also the hour when the great difference between noble garden and working garden shrinks. In daylight, the enclosed beds can look ordered, symbolic, almost serene. In the evening, all gardens are simply places that will cool, darken, and collect dew. The herbs fold into themselves, the paths lose their neat edges. The walls stop displaying privilege and start holding shadow. Somewhere inside those bounds are the leeks you checked, the beans you tied, the fruit you judged not yet ready. They continue being alive without witness. It is a humbling trade in that way. You can guide growth, protect it, feed it, prune it, carry its produce inward. You cannot command it into stillness, so you begin to let the day go. Not all at once, slowly. The mind makes one more pass, much as the eyes did at the gate. Did the young plants have enough water for the night? Was the hurdle set firmly where the dog nosed under last week? Did the kitchen boy count the bundles properly? Or will some clerk's line tomorrow suggest fewer herbs than your back remembers carrying? Such thoughts arrive, and then, if you are lucky, they dull at the edges. There is no more light to work by now, and no praise to be won by lying awake over parsley. The room grows warmer in patches and colder in corners. Straw rustles, wood settles, conversation thins. If you sleep among others, then the quiet comes in layers rather than all at once. One last cough, one muttered word, the shift of a blanket, the soft complaint of a bench or truckle bed. If you are alone, the silence is larger, though not empty. Medieval nights are full of tiny sounds. Wind feels along boards. Ash gives a soft, inward sigh. Somewhere outside, an animal moves with confidence through darkness that still belongs more to beasts than to people. You lie down with the kind of tiredness that does not ask for poetry. It asks for enough straw, enough wool, enough stillness. Your body keeps the map of the day. The knees remember bending, the palms remember handles, the nose remembers mint, damp earth, smoke, and the rich, blunt force of manure. Your ears remember bells and kitchen clatter and the scratch of a rake over dry soil. By morning, some of that memory will have faded into plain stiffness. Then, the bell will speak again. The light will come pale over wall and roof, and the enclosed ground will require from your hands the same steady service it required today. For now, though, the garden is closed. The king's household has eaten. The accounts, accurate or not, can wait for daylight. The fruit hangs where it hangs. The herbs rest where they root. And you, who have spent the whole day tending small living things so that a great household may seem orderly, finally stop moving and let the darkness keep watch instead. The room has gone quiet enough now that each small sound keeps its own shape. A log settles in the hearth. Someone turns over once in the straw. From farther off, beyond wall and yard and service buildings, a dog gives a single, doubtful bark, and then thinks better of it. You lie still and let the day finish leaving your body. The ache in your back is no surprise. It has been earned slowly, not by one grand effort, but by hundreds of little bendings. Stooping to weed, lifting pails, carrying baskets, reaching up into fruit wood, pressing a spade into earth with the ball of the foot. A royal garden sounds fine when said quickly. In the body, it is mostly knees, wrists, shoulders, and the long, dull lesson of repetition. Your hands keep a memory of the tools even after the tools are gone. The rake handle has left its plain, straight feeling in the palms. The knife has asked for a pinch grip all afternoon. The basket has pulled one arm lower than the other. Even resting, the fingers do not fully forget. They curl as if there were still twine to tie or stems to gather. The bed is simple. That matters less than tiredness. A servant or hired working man in a royal household does not expect much ceremony at night. There may be a shared room, or a place near other household workers, or some narrow arrangement made practical by rank and season. Exact sleeping arrangements differ from place to place, and the records are much better at counting fruit and wages than at telling us who snored beside whom. But wherever you are laid down, the important thing is plain enough. You are indoors. You are out of the dew. For tonight, the work has released you. Your supper is no longer warm, but it is still with you. Bread sits heavily in the stomach in a comforting way. Ale has taken the rough edge off thirst. Pottage, if there was pottage, has done its usual modest work and asked for no praise. A man who tends the king's herbs may well eat onions and leeks, much like the ones he carries inward. There is a small comedy in that. The fine household receives the neatest bundles. You receive what keeps a person standing. If this is summer, the air inside still holds a little stored heat from the day, though the night begins to thin it. If it is spring or autumn, the chill creeps in earlier and sits low near the floor. Medieval work is always tied to season, and sleep is no exception. Thick bedding, shared warmth, the placement of the hearth, the luck of dry weather. All these mean more than comfort as we would describe it now. They mean whether your rest mends you well enough to rise ready, or only less broken than before. And rising ready is the whole point. Tomorrow will not ask whether you felt poetic under the stars. It will ask whether the gate opens on time, whether the herbs are cut before the kitchen wants them, whether the young trees are checked for damage, whether the beds stay neat enough that the enclosed ground still looks governed and useful. Royal service often appears in records as lists and payments, but under those lists is a very plain requirement. Someone has to wake up and do the thing again. So you let the names of tomorrow's tasks pass by without holding them too tightly. Perhaps there will be more tying in the beans, perhaps dung to move, perhaps a patch of earth to turn, or a path to edge, or fruit to sort into what is sound and what must be used quickly. Perhaps the steward will want a count, perhaps no one will speak to you at length at all. Most labouring days are not built from surprises. They are built from return. That return is part of what makes this work easy to overlook in grand history. A battle has one date. A coronation has one procession. A treaty has signatures. A garden has watering, weeding, pruning, carrying, locking, opening, and then the same again under slightly different weather. It leaves fewer dramatic traces. Yet this quiet repetition helps feed a household, scent a chamber, stock a kitchen, furnish a physic remedy, and make authority look smooth from the outside. The king may never see every hand that keeps his grounds in order. The order still depends on those hands. You do not need to call it important for it to be necessary. Medieval people were often better than we are at accepting that some of life rests on tasks too ordinary for praise. A path swept clean is not a marvel. A herb bed kept from running wild is not a song. Fruit gathered before rot takes it is not glory. Still, if these things fail long enough, everyone notices. The kitchen notices. The steward notices. The household notices. Even gentle beauty in a place like this has to be maintained by tired people. The darkness goes on settling. Talk, if there was any left, has faded away. The chapel bell will come again in its own time, and daylight will begin another patient claim on the body. For now there is only this narrow mercy. You are horizontal. The walls hold, the tools are still. Outside, behind their boundaries, the beds and trees and herbs pass the night without your help for a few hours. In truth, that may be as close to peace as a working gardener in late medieval England usually gets. Not a perfect peace, not a soft, embroidered one, just the plain peace of finished labour, full stomach or nearly full stomach, and darkness thick enough to hide all untidiness until morning. The enclosed garden, which all day needed watching, can now disappear into black shapes and damp scent. The king's household sleeps in layers above and around you. You sleep among the lower layers that keep the whole thing from fraying, and so the day closes in the same spirit that shaped it. No trumpet, no proclamation, no great event to write down. Only a man growing still after many useful motions, while somewhere beyond shutter and wall, the cultivated ground waits for dawn, and for your hands, and for another ordinary day. Morning comes again without asking whether you are ready for it. The air is cold enough to make the first breath feel thin. The bedding has kept some warmth, but not much. You wake in the same plain way as before, with stiff joints, a dry mouth, and the quiet knowledge that the garden has already begun its work without you. Dew settles, leaves loosen. A bird starts somewhere under the eaves. Beyond wall and shutter, the enclosed ground waits in its patient way. This is one of the truest things about your life. The king may travel. Stewards may change. Clerks may sharpen new quills and write new names in old columns. The garden does not care for any of that. It answers to weather, light, water, roots, rot, and the slow appetite of the household. So your day begins again where yesterday ended, not with grandeur, with living things that must be noticed. You rise before the rooms above have fully stirred. The body complains in familiar places. Calves, lower back, hands. The complaints are ordinary, and so they are easy to accept. You pull on what will do for work. Wool that has known smoke and damp. Hose gone soft at the knee. Shoes that keep out some mud, though never all of it. A belt for the knife and small tools. Nothing elegant, nothing meant to be looked at for long. Outside, the light is still grey, and the ground carries that washed smell of wet earth, bruised herb, old straw, and distant ash. A royal residence can contain many scents, but the garden keeps its own kingdom of them. Sage when touched, onion when cut, mint when stepped near, dung when turned, pond water when the air is still. In warm months there is sweetness too, but never only sweetness. Useful places are mixed places. You move first to the gate and boundary, because enclosure is half the work. A garden like this is not simply a patch of ground. It is a controlled piece of the world, held apart by wall, hedge, hurdle, ditch, or some mix of all four. That boundary keeps out dogs, hens, geese, thieves, and careless feet. It also keeps in value. Leeks meant for the kitchen, herbs meant for physic, fruit not yet ready to leave the branch. Privacy itself, if there is an arbor or a green walk, meant for gentler company than yours. So your first look is always for damage. A loosened wattle, a gap under a gate, a branch bent where it should not be bent, hoof marks where no hoof should be. The great labour of garden keeping is often less about growing than about preventing loss. A week of careful work can be undone in a short, stupid hour by beast, child, storm, or hungry man. That is as true in a king's household as anywhere else. The beds answer in small signs. Moisture still held near the roots. Young shoots upright enough. A patch of leaves pecked at by something light and quick. A line of weeds stronger than yesterday. In manuscript pictures, gardeners often look neat, almost cheerful, bent politely over tidy earth. Real ground is less obedient than that. It crusts, it puddles, it clumps around the spade. It grows what you did not ask for. Even inside royal walls, dirt remains dirt. You carry simple tools because simple tools do nearly everything. A spade if the day asks for digging. A hoe for loosening and cutting. A rake for drawing order from roughness. A knife or pruning hook for stems and withies. Baskets for what must be carried. A cart if there is dung, brush, or harvest enough to justify the trouble. There is no clever machine to spare the back. Skill lies in seeing what needs doing before it grows expensive, and in repeating useful motions so often that the body performs them with little argument. By now, a bell may have sounded from chapel or church, not as a command to the plants, of course, but to the people arranged around them. Time in your world comes as light on the beds, hunger in the belly, and bells through the damp air. That shared rhythm binds the household together. Cooks, clerks, carters, servants, priests, labourers, all moving by different burdens under the same sound. Your burden simply happens to be green. Soon enough, there will be baskets to fill, cords to tie, water to fetch, branches to judge, and paths to clear where fine shoes may later pass without seeing what mud tried to do there in the dark. But for one small moment, the garden is only waking, and so are you. The leaves hold their beads of water. The walls hold the night a little longer. Your hands are still empty. And the ordinary day, which has no wish to be remembered, begins again in silence. The first true work of the morning is not always picking or pruning or carrying something fragrant toward the kitchen. Some mornings the garden asks for less graceful service. The rain has been patient for days, not violent, just steady enough to press the paths flat, loosen the edges of beds, and draw a slow skin of mud over every place where neatness depends on dry weather. So you begin with repair. Your shoes darken at once. The leather takes on the damp. The hem of your working tunic gathers wet soil from the lower leaves and from the path itself. In a royal garden, the enclosed ground is meant to look governed. That does not mean grand in every corner. It means kept. It means the onion rows are still rows. The borders still hold. The little drains still remember where water is supposed to go instead of simply standing where it pleases. You take up a spade that is plain in every possible way. Wood polished by hands. Iron edge thinned by use. Medieval gardening does not depend on clever devices. It depends on repeated motions done at the right time. A ditch chokes by degrees, and it is cleared by degrees too. You cut into the soft edge, lift a clotted weight of mud, and turn it aside where it will not slide back. Then again, then again. It is the sort of labor that leaves no fine result for anyone to admire. It only prevents a worse mess later in the day. Along the inner boundary, woven hurdles lean where the ground has softened beneath them. Enclosures matter in places like this. Walls, fences, hedges, trellised lengths of wood and wattling. They keep out hungry animals, careless feet, and light fingers. They also tell the eye that this small patch of earth belongs to order. You press one stake deeper. You test another with your palm. One strip of binding has loosened, so you replace it with a fresh, withy cut earlier, and saved for exactly this sort of ordinary failure. The work asks for your back more than your thoughts. Bend, lift, press, step. Scrape the sole clean on a stone. Move on. In manuscript pictures, gardeners often look surprisingly tidy while they dig, as if labor could be framed neatly inside a painted margin. Real mud is less obedient. It gathers at the ankles. It makes each basket a little heavier than it should be. It turns a short walk into a patient one. Near the herb beds, the rain has done a gentler kind of damage. Not destruction, only crowding. Sage and rue can bear a certain roughness, but low-growing herbs sulk if the soil cakes too hard around them. You crouch and loosen the top layer with a small hoe, careful not to disturb roots that are doing their quiet work below. Parsley is checked. Leeks are checked. A few bent stems are coaxed upright and left to decide for themselves whether they still mean to stand. This is the useful plainness of the job. A king may own the ground. Clerks may count the produce. Cooks may turn herbs and onions into dinner. But before any of that, someone must notice where the water sat in the night. Someone must feel which path is giving way. Someone must see that one bed is holding too much damp while another has crusted over on top. Much of the knowledge lives in the hands before it ever reaches words. If there were a full account of a royal gardener's day, it would likely sound less elegant than the garden itself. More lifting, more waiting on weather, more dung, more knots, more broken edges. Historians piece the work together from household records, plant remains, tools, manuscript scenes, and practical reconstruction. The broad shape is solid enough. Gardens in elite medieval England mixed use and display, and they needed constant care. The exact order of one wet morning like this is, by necessity, a careful reconstruction. Still, the ground tells a believable story. Rain falls, drains clog, borders slump. Someone has to set them right. A cart passes somewhere beyond the wall, the wheels making that thick wooden sound that belongs only to wet roads. Inside the enclosure, your world stays smaller. The smell is leaf, mud, damp straw, and the faint sour richness from yesterday's dung heap waiting for its turn. You pause long enough to straighten your back and listen to the bell in the distance, thinning into the air. Morning is moving on. The kitchen will begin asking for useful green things soon enough. For now, the path holds a little better under your feet. The ditch carries water where it should, and the garden, though still wet, is once again behaving itself. Morning keeps moving, and the garden has already used up the easy part of the day. The wet paths are steadier now beneath your shoes. The ditch carries its narrow brown stream without argument. A little order has returned. That is often as much triumph as a gardener is granted. Then the next small need arrives. It does not come with ceremony. A boy from the kitchen or a lower servant sent on another person's errand appears at the edge of the enclosure with a basket on one arm and impatience in the way he stands. The cooks want green things. Not later. Soon. Something for the pottage, something fresh to cut the heaviness of meat or broth. Parsley, perhaps. Leeks, if they are ready. A few onions. Sage. Maybe sorrel, if the season still allows it. So your work turns from mud and repair to choosing. That is a quieter skill than digging, but it asks for the same attention. You do not pull everything handsome at once. You take what can be spared. You leave what must thicken. In a royal household, even a humble bed of herbs serves more than one mouth, and more than one day. The garden is expected to keep giving. You move along the beds with a knife and a basket. The leaves are cool and a little slick against your fingers. Parsley comes up in soft green clusters. Sage feels thicker, almost furry, and carries its dry, strong scent at the first touch. The smell rises around your hands as though the plant has been waiting all morning to say what it is. Leeks take more effort. You loosen the earth at their roots and lift them with care so the white shafts stay long and clean enough to please the eye indoors. Much of medieval gardening is like this. The tools are simple: a spade, a hoe, a knife, a hook, a basket. The real work lives in judgment. What is ready? What will keep? What bruises easily? What needs to be sent at once to the kitchen? And what can wait under a bit more soil and weather? No machine thinks for you. Your back does one part. Your eyes do the rest. You sort as you gather. Good leaves in one basket, coarser stems set aside. Damaged growth for lesser use, or for nothing at all. The king does not eat every herb that passes through this place, of course, and the household above you has many grades of table and appetite. Still, rank reaches even into vegetables. The finest heads and cleanest bunches travel inward. Everything else finds its own level, as most things do. A royal garden in late medieval England is not only a place to admire, it is useful and it is expected to prove it. Historians can say that with some confidence. Elite gardens mixed pleasure with provision. They held walks, arbours, and enclosed green quiet, but they also held onions, beans, herbs, cabbages, fruit, and all the repetitive labour needed to bring them from soil to table. Even where exact planting plans are lost, account rolls, archaeology, and manuscript images point in the same direction. Beauty grew here. So did supper. You bend again, and the basket grows heavier on your arm. The smell inside it changes by layers. Sharp onion, cool parsley, damp earth clinging to roots, crushed sorrel, bright and almost sour. It is not a grand perfume, it is the smell of the household being fed one handful at a time. By now, the sun has lifted enough to warm the upper leaves without drying the ground below. Moisture still clings to the shade. A bee moves lazily near the herb beds, choosing its business with more leisure than you are allowed. Somewhere beyond the wall, a cart rattles over firmer road. Somewhere nearer, a door bangs in the service yard. The palace, or castle, or great royal lodging has many hungers, and they all wake fully by mid-morning. You wipe soil onto your apron or tunic rather than onto the basket. Clean enough matters. Not polished, just not careless. Medieval households could be very exacting in ordinary ways. Produce had to be carried, counted, noticed, and in some places likely accounted for, though the records seldom stop long enough to describe the hands that did the carrying. The clerk may note supplies. The cook may complain of shortages. Your name can vanish while your leaks remain perfectly visible on the page. That is the quiet way of this work. The garden speaks upward through objects, not through you. A bundle of herbs, a measure of onions, a basket of lettuce before noon. Service leaves traces, but often not the servant. When the basket is full enough, you do not linger to admire it. You trim the worst roots, shake off the thickest clods, set the bunches in some order. The kitchen wants usefulness, but households of rank also like neatness, the little appearance of control that says the world is arriving in proper form. Even mud should know its place, so you carry the basket toward the service side or hand it off at the boundary, depending on the arrangement of the residence and the custom of the place. Exact routine is harder to recover than the broad outline. Historians have no tidy hour-by-hour diary from one named royal gardener telling us precisely when every leek changed hands. What survives is patchier than that. Still, the pattern is plain enough. Gardens supplied households. Someone gathered, someone delivered, and the day moved on. After the basket leaves your arm, it feels strangely light there. For a moment you notice the pull that has been sitting in your shoulder since dawn. You straighten, the beds remain, the weeds remain. The borders still ask to be edged. A garden is never emptied by one delivery. It simply grows a little quieter for a few breaths, as though it too has paused after giving away part of itself. Then you look over what is left to do before dinner. There are ties to check, young growth to guide, perhaps a few damaged stems where wet weather has bent them too far. Nothing dramatic, only the next small necessary thing waiting in the soft middle of the day. By the soft middle of the day, the garden asks for quieter work. The heavy lifting has already had its turn. The paths have been steadied. The kitchen has had its first basket. The wet stems have been looked over and coaxed upright, where they can still be persuaded. So now, you move towards smaller tasks. These are not lighter exactly. They simply ask for your fingers more than your shoulders. You cross toward the little store space where tools, cord, and seed are kept as dry as they can be kept in an English summer. The doorwood smells faintly of damp boards and old dust. Inside, the air changes. It is cooler still, a place of sacks and bundles and small delayed intentions. Here is the twine for tying beans. Here are spare willow withies cut and saved for supports. Here are baskets mended one more time instead of replaced. And here, in boxes and cloth packets, is next season waiting in a quieter form. A king's garden is not only what grows in the beds before you, it is also what can be planted later, what can be replaced after rot, what can be sown when one crop gives way to another. Medieval gardening depends as much on patience and saving as on digging. Seeds are small, but they hold order inside them. If they are kept too wet, they spoil. If mice reach them, months of care vanish into a few neat chew marks. You lift the lid of a chest and look over what remains. Peas, beans, onion sets. Herb seed wrapped as carefully as the household allows. Not every seed in a late medieval English royal garden would be stored in exactly the same way from place to place, and the records are better at telling us money and purchases than the look of every shelf. Still, stores like this are part of the practical rhythm. Gardens are planned with hands, but also with keeping. A clerk has likely marked, counted, or at least cared about some portion of what passes through royal service, even if he cares for it in the dry way of ink rather than in the wet way of soil. Produce may be carried inward, labor may be paid, materials may be noted when bought or issued. The garden feels quiet at this hour, yet it belongs to the same household machinery that counts candles, bread, wine, fish, and firewood. You feel that truth most clearly when someone appears at the doorway holding a scrap of parchment or a memory sharpened by duty. It is not a grand inspection. No noble person glides in to admire a rose. More likely it is a small exchange, almost dull enough to disappear. A servant asks whether more steaks can be cut. A Reeves man wants to know if a cart should fetch dung later in the week. A clerk, or someone sent in his place, asks what was carried to the kitchen this morning, because somewhere beyond the wall another pair of hands likes things named. The answer is given plainly. Lettuce, leeks, parsley. A little of this. Not so much of that. This is one of the quiet truths of royal work. Even a bed of onions can become administration. The king will never smell the seed chest. He may never see the muddy hem of your tunic. But royal life rests on many such unseen reckonings. Fruit trees do not arrive by miracle. Herbs do not sort themselves. Paths do not edge themselves straight after rain. Someone notices what is low. Someone saves what can be used again. Someone answers when the household asks what the earth has yielded so far. You take a little time to sort what can still be trusted. Loose seed is pinched between finger and thumb. Withies are bundled. Cord is wound back from a careless tangle. A pruning knife is checked and wiped. The work is calm and a little dull and deeply necessary. In manuscript pictures, gardeners often look tidy while they dig or prune, though real work is certainly muddier than painted pages admit. But the tools are true enough in spirit. Spade, hoe, knife, basket, hook. Simple things wearing down little by little beside the body that uses them. Outside, the day has flattened into that pale, working brightness that makes it hard to guess the hour by the sky alone. So you listen instead. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, a bell carries thinly through the air, perhaps for a service you will not attend just yet, perhaps simply as another mark in the shared day. Sound travels differently after noon, softer, less eager. The household has eaten. The kitchen smoke has changed. Even the birds seem to conduct their business with less argument. You step back out with a handful of ties and a small basket of odds and ends that need returning to their places. The ground is beginning to dry on top, though only in patches. Under the surface, it still keeps the memory of rain. You kneel beside a row that has grown untidy in the last hours. One stem is brought back to its support. Another is judged too far gone and gently cleared away. A little gap appears in the row where growth had looked certain only yesterday. Gardens are full of such modest losses. No one mourns them aloud. Then you move to the herbs again, not to harvest in quantity this time, but to pinch, neaten, and keep them from running into one another. Sage can thicken. Rue can sprawl. Parsley can crowd where it pleases if not watched. In an enclosed royal garden, usefulness and appearance sit side by side. A bed may feed the kitchen and still be expected to look cared for. Order itself is part of the service. Not grand beauty, perhaps, as a poet might praise it, but visible keeping. Nothing wasted, nothing left to slump when a hand can set it straight. The work takes time in the most ordinary way. Bend, tie, pinch, lift, carry, pause, stand carefully, bend again. This is the shape of many hours in a medieval life. Not event, but repetition. Not drama, but sequence. By modern measure, it might seem almost empty, yet it fills the day completely. When historians reconstruct such labor, they must piece it together from accounts, plant remains, tools, images, and common sense about how long wet earth clings to boots. The full day is not written down for us in one neat voice. Even so, the pattern holds. By the time you finish, the beds look only slightly different. That is often how good work looks. A tie sits where there was none. A path edge is cleaner. A small packet is safe from damp. A question from the household has been answered. The garden is not transformed. It is simply prevented once again from slipping a little out of hand. And in the stillness after these small corrections, with the light steady on leaf and wall, you can feel the day easing onward toward whatever modest task comes before the next meal. The light has shifted without making any fuss about it. It is no longer the pale, useful light of morning, and not yet the long gold of evening. It rests more heavily now on the wall, on the damp boards of the seed chest, on the narrow edges of leaves where water still lingers in little beads. This is the soft middle of the day, when the body notices itself again. Your lower back is warm and stiff. Your hands smell of crushed green stems and wet earth. Under your nails there is a dark line that no washing basin will fully persuade away. Dinner is not ready yet, but the kitchen has begun thinking about it. You can feel that without seeing the hearth. Somewhere beyond the garden wall there is movement of pots, the faint knock of wood set down, and the low traffic of servants crossing yards with purpose that is neither hurried nor idle. A great household does not leap from one meal to the next. It turns toward food slowly, through many hands. Yours are among them. So you take up a basket again, though not the larger one used earlier. This is a smaller gathering, a tidying gathering. A cook may want a handful more herbs, perhaps some young onions, perhaps sorrel if the sharpness is wanted, perhaps parsley, because parsley is wanted nearly always. In a royal household, even plain green things acquire rank simply by being expected at the proper hour and in the proper quantity. There is no trumpet for this, only the small repeated duty of bringing what grows best today and not what might have been better yesterday. You move more slowly now. That is not laziness. It is the ordinary wisdom of work done since dawn. Fast hands bruise leaves, tear roots, miss signs of rot, and waste steps. Slow hands notice. You part the tops of the onions and judge their size by touch before pulling. You cut herbs with a short blade rather than wrenching them free. You shake loose the clinging soil. You lay each green thing into the basket in a rough order that will save someone else trouble later. Heavy below, tender above, nothing crushed if it can be helped. The garden itself has quieted in the noon warmth. Bees go on with their own stern little business among flowers that are useful, decorative, or both depending on who is asked. A fly troubles your cheek. Somewhere near the wall, hidden in shade, a drip continues from the morning's wet patch into the ditch. The sound is so small that it becomes almost comforting. Medieval work is full of such sounds: scrape, snip, foot on soil, the distant bell, a cartwheel from another yard. Not silence exactly, just a world in which noise seldom hurries you. For some parts of this day we have records, and for some we only have good sense and comparison. Household accounts can tell us that gardens supplied great residences, that labour was paid, that materials were bought, and that produce moved inward. They do not often bother to tell us whether your shoulder aches as you bend for another bunch of herbs. That part must be supplied by the body itself. Any hand-watered, hand-weeded, hand-tied garden makes the same quiet demands. Bend, lift, carry, straighten, walk back, repeat. History keeps the payments more readily than the muscles. You pause by a bed of leeks and choose only a few. Their pale shafts are still streaked with soil where the earth has held them close. Leeks matter because they keep well enough, flavor much, and ask little praise. Cabbages, onions, peas, beans, sage, parsley, rue, perhaps garlic, perhaps hyssop or mint depending on place and season. These are not jeweled luxuries, yet they are exactly the kinds of things that make an elite household run with less complaint. Fine dishes still require humble flavor. Rich tables still depend on plain growing things pulled from ordinary dirt. The basket grows heavier in the arm, though not by very much. It is the sort of weight that announces itself gradually. A few cuttings, a few roots, a bunch of this, a handful of that. Service is often made of small collections rather than grand loads. When you carry dung, the body knows it. When you carry herbs, the body is tempted to think the task barely counts. But light work repeated all day can settle into the bones as firmly as heavier labor. By evening, even the modest basket will have become part of your tiredness. At the edge of one bed, a few stalks have leaned where the ground remains too soft. You set the basket down and press the soil in with your hand. Then you add a short support, not because the plant is in mortal danger, but because neglect spreads quietly. One bent stem becomes a break. One break invites damp. Damp invites spoilage. Good gardening is often no more glorious than noticing a small weakness before it has time to become a larger one. A king may dine upstairs and never think of the hand that straightened this one little row. The row stands anyway. You gather a last bit of parsley and pinch away the yellowing leaf from the bunch before it goes inward. This too is part of the work. The household does not want the garden entire. It wants the useful part, the presentable part, the part already halfway prepared by someone else's care. That is true in royal service as in humbler places. The difference is scale and perhaps expectation. Behind a great residence, ordinary labor is expected to look easy even when it is not. When the basket is ready, you lift it and stand still for a moment before walking it toward the service side again. The paths are a little drier than they were in the morning, though the shaded places still give under the heel. The wall throws a firmer line now. The air is warm enough to smell leaf and soil together, with that faint sweetness bruised herbs leave on the fingers. Dinner draws nearer by scent as much as by bell. You pass the produce inward, perhaps to a kitchen servant, perhaps to someone just outside the busier room, and there is no need for many words. In households like this, much is done by habit. People know the basket, they know the hour. They know that what arrives must be sorted, washed if needed, chopped, boiled, added, strewn, or stored. A nod can be enough. A muttered count if the house is careful. A clerk somewhere may care more for number. The cook cares more for freshness. You, for the moment, care mostly that the load has left your arm. Then you turn back toward the garden, a little lighter and a little more tired, with that brief, empty-handed feeling that comes after carrying something for a while. The beds are waiting as they were before. The weeds have not surrendered. The ties have not checked themselves. The paths have not swept their own edges. Yet the hour after a delivery has its own quiet softness. One small obligation has passed inward through the wall. Another waits outside it, in the warm stillness, before dinner finally comes. Dinner finally comes not with ceremony. but with release. The garden can wait for a little while. The weeds remain where they are. The ties hold without you. The sun still leans warm on the walls, but your body has already begun to listen for the meal long before the bell or summons reaches you. By this hour, your hands feel lined with dust. Your shoulders have that quiet heaviness that comes from many small bendings and liftings. Not pain exactly, just use. You cross from the ordered green into the service world that keeps the whole residence moving. Here the air changes. Outdoors smells of leaf, damp earth, crushed herbs and warm straw. Indoors or half indoors under a passage roof, the smells gather closer. Pottage, bread, ale. Maybe onions cooked down soft. Maybe peas. Perhaps a little cheese, if the household is kindly supplied that day. For most working people in medieval England, meals are plain and filling rather than varied, and a gardener in royal service likely eats much the same sort of sturdy food that many other servants do. The king's table is another country. Your dinner is built for work. You sit when there is space to sit. A bench if the room has one. A stool, a plank, or simply a place against a wall where your legs can rest straight for a few moments. There is relief in setting down your own weight. The first swallow of ale tastes almost soft after dust. The first spoonful of pottage feels less exciting than necessary, and that is part of its comfort. Bread tears under the fingers. Steam rises, then fades. No one speaks as grand people do in romances. Conversation, when it comes, is practical. Who is short of help? Which path is muddy? Whether rain may come by evening, whether the cook wants more herbs later, whether a cart has arrived, whether one of the hens has got where it should not. You are not alone in your tiredness. That may be the gentlest part of the meal. Around you, other bodies are carrying their own day. Kitchen hands with hot faces from the fire. Carters with dust at the hem. A laundress with reddened hands. A boy sent back and forth all morning and still not old enough to complain with style. Royal service sounds grand when written in large words. At dinner, it is mostly people eating before the next task begins. If you keep seed, weather, and bed edges in your mind for long enough, the talk of other workers can feel almost strange for a minute, as if the human world has returned after a stretch spent among beans and wallflowers. But the garden has never really stood apart from these people. The kitchen draws from it. The clerk counts it. The stable yard may send dung toward it. The well serves it. Even your short rest depends on the same household order that tells every other servant when to stop and when to begin again. There may be a little dry humour, soft and worn from use. The kind that survives because it costs nothing. Someone remarks that the onions in the garden stand straighter than the men carrying them. Someone else says the leeks are better behaved than boys. No one laughs very hard. It is too warm and too ordinary for that. Still, a line like this passes across the meal like a brief breeze. Then the bowl's empty. Crusts diminish. Hands wipe on cloth or tunic. The body, having softened for a few precious minutes, must harden itself again for standing. That may be the most disappointing motion in a medieval day. Rising after food when work has not ended. Yet even that has its rhythm. You do not leap up. You gather yourself. You feel the bench leave you. Your knees remember their office. Outside, the afternoon waits in full light, with beds still needing their patient share of care. You rise from the bench with the taste of pottage still faintly warm in your mouth, and the afternoon receives you without enthusiasm. The sun is high now, not fierce perhaps, but steady enough to flatten shadows and draw the softness from the air. Dinner has taken the edge off hunger, but not from labor. Your legs feel heavier for having rested. Your hands, once folded around a bowl, return to wood handles and wicker rims as if they had never done anything else. The garden after dinner always seems slightly changed, though very little has altered. Light lies harder on the paths. The smell of earth grows warmer and drier near the surface, richer beneath where the hoe has broken it earlier in the day. Flies move in a lazy fashion over the damp places, and the midden scent from some distant corner of the service yard drifts now and then above the sweeter smell of herbs. The beds wait in that patient way plants have. They do not praise your morning efforts. They simply require the next ones. At this hour, much of the work turns smaller. Smaller motions, smaller judgments. The broad force of morning has passed. You are less likely now to break new ground than to preserve what has already been set right. A line of onions is checked for soil crusting after heat. A few weeds, thin as thread, are pinched away before they root themselves more boldly. Bean supports are tested with a hand against their wobble. A twisted tie of rush or bast is tightened around a soft stem that has leaned too far. It is easy work to describe badly. It sounds as though almost nothing happens. In truth, this is the sort of care by which a garden remains a garden and not a patch of hopeful disorder. Where the ground has dried too fast, you carry water, not in a grand stream, not by some convenient hidden pipe, but by repeated lifting. Bucket from well or cistern, step by step along the path. Lower, pour, turn back. The labor is plain and old. Medieval gardening depends less on clever devices than on human backs agreeing once again to do the same necessary thing. Watering vessels and buckets appear in image and record often enough, and the need is obvious in warm weather, though no surviving voice tells us your exact count for an afternoon like this. So we move carefully here. The rhythm is reconstructed. The tiredness is not hard to imagine. The first pour darkens the soil with a smell almost cool enough to taste. Dust settles at once. Around leeks and cabbages, around herbs near the kitchen side, the water vanishes quickly, sinking toward roots that do not care whether the hand above them belongs to a king's servant or a village cotter. The difference lies in the enclosure, in the order, in the expectation that these beds must serve many purposes at once. Food, certainly. Fragrance, too. Physic, perhaps. A tidy face shown to those who may walk past. In a royal garden, even plain watering helps hold together comfort, usefulness, and display. You do not water everything equally. That would waste effort. A gardener in any century learns the unfairness of care. Tender things receive more. New transplants ask for watching. A dry patch near a wall may need 2 visits, while damp ground by a lower edge needs none. Trees in orchard rows are another matter. Their roots run deeper, and what they mostly ask from you on a day like this is not a bucket, but attention. You scan leaves for curl. You note fruit too crowded on one branch. Windfall bruising in the grass. A bit of rubbing where stake or tie sits badly. If pruning must wait, remembering begins now. A palace or castle garden is rarely one simple square. There are kitchen plots, herb spaces, fruit trees, perhaps a small pleasure ground, perhaps fish pond edges, perhaps vine or arbor where the site and ambition allow it. Not every royal residence has the same arrangement, and modern historians are careful about pretending to know exact plans where records fall silent. Still, enclosed gardens, orchards, herbers, and managed grounds are well attested across late medieval elite life. That means your afternoon is not spent in one fixed posture. You walk, you stoop, you rise, you carry, you inspect. You move from usefulness to neatness and back again. The body serving both without much distinction. Sometimes another pair of hands joins you for a while. A boy sent to carry. A laborer hired for heavier work in season. a servant passing through with a message from kitchen or steward. Great households run on these crossings. The king's gardener is not a solitary poet among roses. He works inside a web of carts, stores, meals, tallies, and requests. If bunches of parsley are wanted fresh, they must be cut at the right time. If fruit is to be kept, it must be gathered with less bruising than haste would cause. If a path by an enclosed walk is to look decent before some gentle company passes there later, somebody's knees and hands must first make it so. Yet the hour remains quiet. No trumpet sounds for watering leaks. No clerk records the exact instant when you bend to pull a stubborn tuft from between paving stones. This is one reason such lives sink so easily from memory. The labour matters every day and announces itself almost never. A royal account may notice wages, tools, plants bought, repairs ordered, baskets sent inward. It seldom pauses over the feeling of a handle warming in your palm, or the brief relief of cloud crossing the sun, or the way a damp hem picks up the smell of mint when you brush past it. Those things survive only by careful inference, and by the fact that human bodies have always tired in much the same language. As the afternoon lengthens a little, the sharpest brightness begins to loosen. Not evening yet. Only the first mild easing. You gather a few cuttings that can be used. You straighten what can be straightened in a few moments. You leave alone what belongs to another day. That too is part of the craft. No garden is ever finished before supper. No worker is ever equal to every need in front of him. The skill lies partly in accepting sequence. This bed today, that border tomorrow. Fruit checked now, ditch later. Seeds kept dry, tools not lost. Modest victories. When at last you set down the last filled vessel for a moment and press your palm into the small of your back, the day has not changed course. It has only continued, which in a medieval garden is often accomplishment enough. The herbs still stand. The onion tops still hold their colour. The tied stems have not fallen. The paths, though never perfect, are passable and cared for. Afternoon work leaves few grand signs. It mostly prevents decline. And with that plain, almost invisible success resting over the beds, you move on in the gentler light toward whatever the later hours ask next. You leave the watered beds and move into the softer work of evening, when the light turns less useful for seeing weeds and more useful for noticing shape. The long rows seem to settle as the sun lowers. Leaves that looked harsh at noon now look quiet. The onion tops bend a little. The herbs hold the last of the day's warmth. A bee still drifts near the flowers, working later than seems sensible. This is one of the plain truths of a royal garden. It must be opened in the morning, and in one way or another, it must be shut again at night. Not with a single grand gesture, more with a series of small endings. A gate checked, a hurdle set straight, a latch lifted and dropped, a path looked over for anything left where it should not be. Tools gathered, counted by habit and taken under cover. A knife lost in the earth is not only a missing knife, it is tomorrow's irritation. You walk the inner edge of the enclosure first. Medieval gardens are often bounded with walls, fences, hedges, or woven barriers. The boundary does more than keep animals out. It also marks the place as cared for, governed, and not open to every foot that passes. Inside this line, things are meant to grow by rule. Beds are measured, fruit is expected, herbs are named. Outside, the wider world keeps its own, less obedient order. At one corner, a bit of wattling has loosened where the damp has softened a tie. You crouch, though your knees dislike it now, and work the hazel withy back through. It is not difficult. It is only stiff. That is the character of much late work in the garden. Nothing dramatic, nothing impossible. Just one more fastening, one more lift, one more little correction before dark. If there are under-gardeners or day labourers helping at this residence, they are thinning away by now, each toward his own lodging, fire, or share of supper. A large royal household uses many kinds of workers, and the garden is not kept by one pair of hands alone. Still, the final seeing to often feels solitary. The sounds flatten. Somewhere beyond the wall, a cart grumbles over ruts in the service yard. From farther off comes a bell, not loud, only firm enough to tell the evening what it is. You turn toward the orchard walk, where fruit trees stand in calmer order than the kitchen beds. Some are left to fuller shape. Some are trained and guided. Medieval gardeners use simple tools for this work, and much of the skill lies not in force but in noticing which growth should stay and which should go. At this hour, you are not doing heavy pruning. You are looking. A torn twig, a branch rubbed badly by wind. Fruit, too, bruised to keep well. Windfalls matter. Good ones may still go to servants or to the pot. Rotten ones invite wasps and spoil the ground beneath. You stoop for 2 fallen apples. One sound enough, one split. The sound one goes into a small basket. The split one is set aside for animals or refuse. Such sorting happens all through a medieval household. The king's table may seem very far from the grass under your shoes, but it depends on endless acts of choosing. Keeper from windfall, dry from damp, useful from spoiled, saved from wasted. A crown rests in part on that kind of quiet separation. Near the herb beds you pause again. Sage, rue, parsley, perhaps hyssop or fennel. Depending on the house and season, each gives off more scent when the heat leaves the air. A royal garden is never only decorative, though some parts are certainly made to please the eye and the mood. It is also practical. Kitchen herbs, medicinal plants, onions, leeks, beans, cabbages, fruit trees, maybe vines in favoured places, all belong to a useful world. Historians can say that much with confidence. The exact arrangement of every bed at every palace is harder to recover. Planting plans rarely survive complete. Much has to be pieced together from accounts, archaeology, images in manuscripts, and the remains of old layouts. So when you walk this evening round, some details are reconstructed with care rather than copied from one perfect document. That uncertainty, though, changes less than you might think. Whatever the exact plan, evening still asks for the same sort of body. A body willing to bend when already tired. Hands willing to pick out one last tuft from a path. Eyes willing to look carefully when they would rather blur. You scrape mud from the side of a spade with a stick. You shake loose earth from a basket. You hang a pruning hook where it can dry. Iron does not love neglect. The air cools another shade. Heat stored in the wall slips back into the garden slowly. This is the gentlest moment of the day. The busiest work is over. The night's dangers are not yet active enough to worry overmuch. You can notice things that daytime labor keeps hidden. A blackbird taking its final hop between beds. The smell of wet soil where water darkened the roots. The faint sweetness from a bruised sprig underfoot. Your own shoulders, at last, dropping half an inch. Then there is the matter of what goes inward. Gardens attached to great households do not simply grow, they supply. Produce may be cut, gathered, counted, carried, and in some cases accounted for by clerks or stewards. We should be careful here. The records are uneven and they rarely describe one gardener's exact thoughts at sundown. But the wider system is clear enough. What leaves the garden enters the machinery of the house. A basket of herbs, a measure of onions, a few sound apples, perhaps flowers for chambers or chapel. Quiet things, necessary things. You collect what can still be taken in this light without fuss. Nothing too wet, nothing likely to bruise if left piled. The basket grows heavier in a modest, manageable way. This is not harvest drama, it is evening tidiness. A little provision carried from one enclosed world to another. By now the paths are dim at their edges. The bright details of leaves begin to merge into broader patches. You make one final pass along the gate. The hinge complains softly. The post is firm enough. The latch falls where it should. In a place like this, closure matters. Not because the garden is precious in some poetic sense, though no doubt some lord or lady may find it lovely by daylight. It matters because every living thing behind this boundary has taken labour, and labour must be guarded if it is to become tomorrow's usefulness. So you stand for a brief moment with the basket against your leg and look over what remains outside with you. Beds, paths, stakes, low shadows, nothing heroic, nothing finished forever. That is the comfort of it, perhaps. Medieval garden work is never complete in the grand sense. It is only complete for this evening, and that is enough. With the last of the light thinning over the enclosed ground, you turn from the gate and carry the day's small gathered things toward the inward rooms, where supper, tally, and the slower closing of the household still wait. Inside now, the air changes. The garden smell comes in with you, but it begins to mix at once with warmer indoor things. Cooked pottage, damp wool, a little rush smoke. The faint sourness of ale left standing in a cup. Your basket, so useful outdoors, becomes another object to be sorted, counted and emptied before your back is allowed to forget the day. You set down what you have carried in. Late apples if the season gives them. A few herbs, perhaps onions pulled earlier and left to dry. Perhaps nothing so notable at all. Some evenings the gardener enters with abundance. Some evenings with only trimmings, seeds, cuttings, and the plain report that beds are in order and the water channels clear. In a royal household, even small things may pass through many hands. What grows quietly outside is soon divided into use. Kitchen, still room, store, table, physic, seed for another season. You do not keep the whole shape of this in writing yourself, at least not in the way a clerk might wish. But the household is full of marks. Someone counts. Someone notes what was brought. Someone remembers which patch yielded well and which one sulked in damp soil. Royal work has a habit of turning earth into ink. The king may never see your hoe. He may never notice the knot in the bean row or the mended hurdle by the herbs. Yet the household notices when parsley is missing, when fruit arrives bruised, when a path turns to mud near a favoured walk, or when the physic herbs are poor because no one weeded in time. So part of the evening belongs not to plants exactly, but to account. Not grand account. No thunder of state. Just the medieval habit of making practical life answer for itself. If labourers helped in the orchard, that may need payment. If dung was carted, someone has allowed the cart and beast. If a knife handle split, it must be replaced. If young trees were bound or grafted, wax, cloth, or withies were used, and cannot be wished back into the shed by piety alone. You feel this sort of reckoning in your legs, while others may feel it in parchment. The body keeps its own tally, a dull pull behind the knees from bending, tightness across the shoulders from carrying water, dirt settled deep in the nails, a rubbed place at the base of the thumb where wood and iron have rested all day. Medieval service is often measured in coin or in food, but first it is measured in wear. And yet, the hour is gentler than the morning. No bed demands weeding now. No cook is waiting for the first herbs of the day. No bell is urging haste. The light outside has nearly gone, and with it the pressure to judge colours precisely, to inspect leaves for damage, to tell fresh growth from the tired green that ought to be cut back. Whatever remains unfinished has crossed quietly into tomorrow. You may sit for a little while near the wall or on a bench or at the edge of the service room where work thins into rest without fully becoming it. Other servants move through their own endings. A scullion with reddened hands, a boy carrying trenchers, someone shaking crumbs from cloth, someone yawning without ceremony. In a great household, very few people finish all at once. The place exhales in layers. Perhaps there is a brief exchange about the weather, about a tree that needs watching, about whether the lower bed should be turned next. Such talk does not sound important. It rarely survives in records. But this is how skill often travels in the Middle Ages. Not always by treatise, not always by neat instruction, by habit, by remark, by watching older hands do things the same way 3 seasons running until the body begins to remember before the mind has named the lesson. That may be true of a king's gardener more than the records let us hear. Manuals and household books can help modern historians imagine methods, and some are from outside England, so they must be used carefully. Manuscript images show hoes, baskets, pruning, digging, tying. Archaeology gives seeds, pollen, soil marks, tool traces. Accounts give purchases and wages. But the ordinary voice at the end of the day is mostly gone. In its place, we have this quieter certainty. Living spaces on elite estates did not keep themselves. Someone closed them. Someone carried in the last basket. Someone thought, before sleep, of what the next dry morning might allow. The room grows dimmer. The business of counting gives way, little by little, to the business of stopping, and you let the day loosen one small knot at a time. At last, there is very little left to count. The tally is done as well as it needs to be done for one evening. A note of herbs sent in, a note of fruit kept back. A small notice, perhaps only in memory, of what the ground will ask tomorrow if the weather stays dry. Medieval work often ends this way, not with a grand finish, only with the point at which hands, light, and usefulness have all thinned together. You rise from the bench slowly. Your knees remind you that they have bent all day. There is earth dried in the seams of your skin. Your cuffs smell faintly of bruised green things, ash from the hearth, and the sweeter, duller scent of straw. These are not rare perfumes. They are the ordinary smells of a household that eats from gardens and sleeps near stores, animals, smoke, and damp timber. The room around you has become quieter without anyone announcing it. Voices have drifted away into other corners of the residence. A servant passes once in the passage with a candle. Then no one passes for some time. In a great household, silence is never complete, but it does gather in layers. Far off, a door shuts. Somewhere deeper in the complex, a pot is set down. Then the sounds flatten again. You make ready for sleep in the plain medieval way, with very little ceremony. There is no hot bath waiting at the end of this day. Full washing is occasional, not nightly routine, and for working people it is often partial and practical. You might rinse your hands, perhaps your face if water is near and not already needed elsewhere. More often you wipe away what you can. Dust leaves in streaks. Soil remains in the nails. The body is not restored to freshness. It is only brought back from the day enough to lie down. Your clothing changes by degrees rather than by neat transformation. Outer things come off. Looser things remain. Shoes are set aside where they can be found in dim light. Hose, shirt, and simple linen do most of the night's work. Medieval sleep is surrounded by cloth. Rough cloth, mended cloth, serviceable cloth. Fine linens exist in the same household, certainly, but not for everybody in every room. Rank is felt even in the dark. Where exactly you sleep depends on place and standing. A king's gardener is close to an important household, but not grand within it. At some residences, service staff may sleep in chambers shared with others, in lofted spaces, near work areas, or in modest rooms assigned by custom and convenience. The records do not usually pause to describe the mattress of the man who prunes pear trees. So this part, like much of the day, must be reconstructed from ordinary practice. Straw-filled bedding is common. Blankets are useful and rarely luxurious. Curtains, if present, keep drafts out more than they create privacy. The bed itself may be no more than a pallet, a low frame, or a mattress laid where room permits. And after a long day, this is enough. Straw shifts under your weight with a soft crackle. The sound is dry and small. It belongs to medieval night almost as much as the hiss of banked embers. If the bedding has been newly stuffed at some point in the season, it will feel springier. If not, it has already learned the shape of many tired bodies. You lie down with the day still faintly attached to you. This is one of the quieter truths of medieval labor. Work does not end at the skin. It lingers in the shoulders, in the lower back, in the thumbs, in the small ache behind the knees. Repetitive garden work is not dramatic, but it is constant. Digging, carrying, stooping, tying, cutting, lifting water, hauling baskets, checking beds, walking paths, closing gates. None of it sounds impressive in a chronicle. All of it settles into the body by nightfall. And yet there is comfort here too. The body knows what it has done. The paths were checked. The beds were closed. Produce went inward. Tools are under cover. Enclosures are fastened. In a world without much spare abundance, this kind of completion matters. Not perfect completion. No medieval gardener ever defeats weather, rot, vermin, theft, or time. Only this smaller thing. For one evening, order has been held. If you listen, the larger household is settling by rank and distance around you. Better chambers farther in, colder ones farther out. Somewhere above or beyond, people with softer bedding also sleep because many quieter people finish their tasks. The king's table, the chapel's herbs, the physic stores, the fruit set by for use, the pleasantness of enclosed walks in daylight, even the simple sight of a tended place beside masonry and timber. All of this has leaned in part on the hands now resting in the dark. That is perhaps the most ordinary and least celebrated fact of the whole day. Royal life looks grand in records and illustrations, but between one sunset and the next, it depends on maintenance. Someone keeps the withies cut. Someone notices mildew. Someone orders dung moved before the rain hardens the track. Someone tells a younger labourer where not to tread. Someone sees that a herb bed meant for use does not vanish under weeds. Quiet authority lives there. Not court authority. Garden authority. Small, repetitive, and real. Outside, a night air presses softly against wall, shutter, and thatch. If this is summer, the warmth has not fully gone, and the room holds the last of it. If it is earlier or later in the year, the chill moves in fast and blankets become less comfort than necessity. Medieval sleep is always close to season. There is no shutting weather out entirely. You rest with it nearby. Wind in the cracks, damp in the boards, cold in the linen, or the heavy stillness of warm air that has nowhere else to go. Perhaps there are others close enough to hear breathing, perhaps a cough, a shift in straw, the small familiar noises of people who have worked enough not to talk long after lying down. Sleep in such places is often communal, practical, and imperfect. Privacy is thin. Fatigue does most of the soothing. Before sleep takes full hold, tomorrow appears for a moment in plain shapes. Water if the morning is dry. A look at the onion bed. Tying where stems have leaned. Cutting what the kitchen wants early. Watching the fruit a little longer. Nothing splendid, only the next necessary thing. In that way, tomorrow is already growing quietly out of today. And then even that thought softens. The room is dim. The tools are still. The gate is shut. Somewhere beyond the walls, the dark lies over orchard, path, and herb bed alike, making no distinction between the useful and the beautiful. You do not need to make one either. In a late medieval royal garden, they have lived side by side all day. So you let the body sink where it can. The shoulders loosen by a small degree. The hands uncurl. The mind stops counting. And in the service quiet behind a king's household, among straw, cloth, faint smoke, and the memory of green scents, the gardener's day passes at last into sleep. Sleep does what garden work often cannot. It puts a clean edge on the day. By the time you wake again, nothing has changed in any grand sense. The walls still stand where they stood. The orchard still waits in its rows. The herbs still hold their sharp little smells close to the earth. And yet morning always asks for the same quiet beginning, as if the whole enclosed place must be earned again by looking at it with fresh eyes. You rise from the service bedding with the dull stiffness that belongs to yesterday as much as to today. Straw has shifted under you. Cloth has warmed and cooled and warmed again through the night. The room carries that familiar mixture of old smoke, wool, packed earth, and the faint green trace that came indoors on your sleeves before sleep. Outside, the air beyond the door is colder than the room, and it reaches your face all at once. This is not a dramatic hour. It is only early. Somewhere beyond the service buildings, a bird starts before the light is fully made. Somewhere farther off, a bell may sound when it chooses, not because you need surprise, but because households, chapels, kitchens, and yards all begin by degrees. Medieval work often follows that shared rhythm of light, bell, and custom more than any exact clock. The day opens because people know how mornings feel. So you stand for a moment in that narrow space between sleep and labor. Your hands are empty. Your back is not yet bent. The ground outside is dark enough to hide small failures kindly. In this first stretch of cool air, a gardener's work returns not as one great burden, but as a line of plain tasks waiting to be touched in order. You pull on what keeps out little and protects enough. Wool against the skin where it can be spared. Rougher cloth over that. Shoes already carrying yesterday's dust in their seams. Nothing in this is elegant, though the place you serve may be thought elegant by those who only visit the paved chambers and the sweeter walks. The garden from inside the work is less graceful. It is damp hems, cold fingers, basket handles smoothing the skin, knees that know the ground before the sun does. Still, there is a kind of relief in the known shape of it. In a royal household, many things are counted, summoned, corrected, delayed, or demanded by someone higher up the chain. In the garden, before others arrive, the first duty is simpler. You look, you notice. You see what the night has done and what the day may permit. That is how the place speaks most clearly. Not in words, in leaning stakes, in a latch that swells after wet weather, in leaves with a silver edge from chill, in a path darkened where water sat too long, in a bed that needs hoeing before the soil hardens, in twine that must be tied again, because living things do not hold still out of respect for rank. When historians try to rebuild such a life, they rarely have a gardener's own voice leading them from blanket to doorway. More often they work from account rolls, plant remains, manuscript images, and the stubborn logic of seasonal labor. That means some details of this hour are careful reconstruction rather than a written diary. But the broad pattern is firm enough. Enclosed gardens at elite and royal sites did not wake and tend themselves. someone rose in the dimness and began the slow work before the bright world noticed. You ease the door so the room behind you keeps as much quiet as it can. The yard is still half shadow. A little damp clings to wood and stone. Somewhere nearby there will be ash to stir, water to lift, tools to gather, and gates to open. Somewhere a cook will soon want herbs. Somewhere a clerk will later want numbers. Somewhere a lord or lady may pass through a path that appears peaceful only because much of its labour is done before breakfast. So the day begins again in the most ordinary way possible. You breathe the cold. You flex the fingers once, then once more. And you step out towards the garden where the dark is thinning just enough for the first small necessary thing. You step out into the garden before full light, and the first thing you notice is how yesterday still lingers on everything. The path is damp. The boards near the tool place hold a dark sheen. A little cold sits low over the beds, not fierce enough to bite, only enough to remind the hands that they belong to the morning before they belong to the body. Nothing grand waits for you. That is the comfort of it. The work begins with small correction. A gate is checked, a latch is lifted. A woven hurdle is set properly where it leaned in the night. In an enclosed garden, much of labour is simply making sure the enclosure remains an enclosure. A wall keeps out wandering animals. A hedge marks where privilege begins. A fence protects the useful green things from mouths, boots, and casual taking. So before any herb is cut or bed is weeded, you make sure the edges still mean what they meant yesterday. The light grows by such small degrees that you feel it before you fully see it. The pale shapes of leeks separate from the darker ground. Sage rises in low grey clumps. Parsley sits close and patient. Somewhere beyond the service yard, a sound of wood against wood suggests another worker starting his own plain duty. A royal household wakes in pieces. Long before a chamber is dressed or a dish is served, these outer places begin to move. Your tools are simple, and that is nearly the whole story of the trade. A spade for turning, a hoe for loosening and scraping, a rake for gathering, a knife and a pruning hook for closer work, baskets for carrying what the hand has cut, water vessels if the weather asks for them, a cart when the day turns heavier. There is no clever machine to save the back. Skill lives in timing and in noticing, and in doing the same plain thing enough times that the body learns how not to waste itself. So you begin where the ground asks least argument. A little weeding at the edge of a bed. A little loosening where the surface has tightened. A little pulling aside of dead matter that has finished being useful. The work is quiet, but not still. Knees bend, fingers pinch. Soil gives with a faint crumble. The smell that rises is mild and old and good, the smell of earth that has been handled many times and still asks to be handled again. If this is summer or near it, the first useful cutting may be for the kitchen. Elite gardens in late medieval England often mix beauty and provisioning so closely that there is no clean line between them. A path may lead to an arbour, and beside it grow herbs meant for broth, pottage, sauce, or physic. Leeks and onions matter more to appetite than roses do. Parsley can enter a dish. Sage can enter both supper and remedy. A king's household eats through many hands, and one of the quietest is yours. You cut carefully because bruised leaves do not improve in the basket. The knife works close to the stem. The hand turns, gathers, and lays down. There is nothing hurried in it yet. Midday can bring counting and carrying and little requests from other departments of the household. But this first hour belongs mostly to choosing what is ready. Not everything that grows may be taken. Not everything that may be taken should be taken early. A gardener serves the next meal, but also the next week. The records that survive from royal life are better at naming purchases than mornings. They tell historians about labor, tools, fruit trees, vines, and supplies. They rarely give you a full voice standing in the dew. So any exact minute of this routine is partly a careful reconstruction. Still, the broad shape is sound. Gardens need opening, beds need inspection. Herbs and vegetables must be cut while fresh. Boundaries must be checked. The body of evidence is plain even when the body doing the work went unnamed. A small basket begins to fill. Green against wicker. Damp stems laid one way, then another. It is not much by the scale of court ceremony. It is plenty by the scale of breakfast. Soon a cook or a kitchen servant will want these common things that never sound important in grand chronicles. The strange comfort of service work is that the household keeps needing exactly what it needed yesterday. Water, fuel, clean cloth, chopped herbs, sound fruit. Nothing here shines, and nearly everything matters. As the sky clears a little more, the ornamental side of the garden wakes more slowly. The enclosed walk, the turf seat, the ordered path, the place meant for rest or private speech. All of it depends on the same pair of hands that also pull weeds from the cabbage ground. Historians are careful here because each royal residence differs, and no neat plan survives for every place. Still, the pattern appears often enough. Utility and display live side by side. The useful patch feeds the household. The pleasant patch reassures it. One says there will be dinner, the other says there is order. You pause only long enough to straighten the back and feel the morning in the shoulders. A bell, faint and practiced, carries across the air. Time in this world is heard more than counted. Prayers, meals, openings, closings. The garden does not need a clock face to know what kind of hour this is. It has moisture on the path, cool in the wrists, and a basket not yet full. So you keep on with the first small necessary things. A few stems cut for the kitchen, a few weeds taken before they seed, a glance along the boundary where a gap might become trouble if left alone. The household behind you is waking towards speech and heat and account and appetite. Out here, morning stays simpler for a little longer. You move from bed to bed in the soft grey light and let the day gather itself one ordinary handful at a time. The basket grows heavier by slow degrees. Not full, never dramatic. Just a little more weight in the arm, and a little more damp on the hem where the leaves brush against your leg. You keep to the easy order of useful things. Parsley first, because the cook may want it early. A little sage, some leeks if the bed is ready to spare them. A handful of onions from the rows that have thickened enough to lift cleanly from the soil. Nothing is taken in haste. A royal household may be grand at table, but gardens answer badly to greed. If you pull too much today, tomorrow looks thin. The path beneath your shoes is beginning to show itself properly now. Grey gives way to green. The shapes of the beds sharpen. The low woven edging is no longer a shadow but a line of work someone had to set in place and mend and keep from sagging. Gardens are often praised for peace by people who do not notice how much tying, lifting, cutting and stooping peace requires. From farther in, beyond the service ways, you begin to hear the household become itself. A door opens, another closes. Somewhere a pail is set down with a wooden knock. A dog gives one short opinion and then thinks better of it. The chapel bell has already done its part. Now the kitchens begin theirs. You kneel beside a patch of herbs that grew a little wild in the last warmth. Here the work becomes smaller. Fingers part stems. A knife does what fingers should not. You trim away what has gone coarse. You leave what should keep growing. Medieval garden work is full of these modest judgments. The tools are plain enough: knife, basket, spade, hoe, hook. What matters more is knowing what to leave in the ground. That kind of knowing rarely appears grandly in records. Accounts can note purchases, wages, trees, carts, and walls. They do not often pause to say that one servant in one cool hour decided this leek should wait another week, while that one was ready now. Yet much of the day rests on choices exactly like that. The king may never see them. The pottage still depends on them. A little further on, near the enclosed walk, the air changes. The kitchen bed smells sharp and green, but this side of the garden is softer. There may be roses in season, or lilies, or simply damp grass, and the faint sweetness of warmed leaves if flowers are past. Royal gardens are not only for eating, they are also for being seen and smelled and entered at the proper hour by people with cleaner hands than yours. So you check these places too. A broken tie, a bent stem, a patch of bare earth where a border wants neatening. Even beauty here has chores attached to it, perhaps especially beauty. You straighten, slowly, because your back has already begun its opinion for the day. The basket is enough for one trip inward now. Not heavy enough to boast about, heavy enough to matter. So you turn toward the service door at the edge of the garden, carrying in your arm the quiet proof that the household is awake and will expect the morning